Imagine a mother who would do anything for her children. Now think of a mother who, even in the face of the deepest pain, remains steadfast in her mission to protect their dignity. This is the story of Rizpah, a courageous woman who became part of history for an act as impressive as it was moving. Rizpah, a concubine of King Saul, lived in Israel during a time of great conflicts and tragedies. But nothing could prepare her for the moment when she lost her two sons. After their deaths, something unbelievable happened. She did not accept that their bodies would be exposed, and with a broken heart, she decided that she would not allow them to be dishonored. So, what did she do? She camped for several months beside their bodies, facing the sun, the cold nights, and even wild animals, to protect what remained of her sons. Can you imagine this scene? A mother alone in an open field day after day, not giving up. She drove away birds that came by day and fierce animals that circled at night. It was as if her love was an unbreakable wall. This is the story the Bible tells us about Rizpah, a woman whose strength and determination made her an example of love and sacrifice. Have you ever stopped to think about what drives a mother to do something like this? Rizpah was a Hivite woman, a descendant of Aya, which means she was a foreigner. According to the biblical account, Rizpah had at least two sons, Armoni and Mephibosheth. It is worth noting that Mephibosheth, the son of Rizpah, is not the same Mephibosheth who was Jonathan's son. In this video, you will discover everything the Bible tells us about Rizpah and understand how her life was marked by tragedies. To understand her story, it is important to know the context in which she lived, full of intrigues, conspiracies, and shifts in power. After King Saul's death, his son Ishbosheth was chosen to rule the tribes of Israel, except for the tribe of Judah, which already followed David's leadership at that time. Thus, Ishbosheth governed the north, while David reigned over Judah. It is important not to confuse Ishbosheth with Mephibosheth. Ishbosheth was Saul's legitimate son who was still alive, while Mephibosheth, as we have already mentioned, was one of Rizpah's sons, Saul's concubine, and Ishbosheth's half-brother. Additionally, Mephibosheth was also the name of Saul's grandson, Jonathan's son, who was crippled. This period was marked by much instability, with a long war between Saul's followers and David's. In this context, Abner, a warrior and commander of Israel's army under the leadership of Saul's house, gained much power and respect in Israel. However, at a certain point, Ishbosheth accused Abner of having a relationship with Rizpah, which caused a great conflict between the two. But why was this a problem? The reason is that Rizpah had been King Saul's concubine, and Ishbosheth saw this alleged involvement as a possible betrayal on Abner's part. Ishbosheth was not just jealous of the possible relationship between Abner and Rizpah, but he feared that it was a strategy by Abner to take the throne of Israel. As I mentioned earlier, Abner had a lot of power in Israel at that time, and this was Ishbosheth's real fear. In ancient times, it was common for military commanders to use these situations to get closer to power and even become kings, often involving relationships with women of the court. The quarrel between Abner and Ishbosheth ended up benefiting King David. Offended by the accusation, Abner decided to support David as king. Without Abner's support, Ishbosheth quickly lost power, and David was able to become the king of a unified Israel. In time, Israel was struck by a drought that lasted 3 years, which caused a severe famine during David's reign, as it is written in the second book of Samuel, chapter 21. David then sought God to understand why the drought was affecting the land. God answered that the drought was a consequence of Saul's betrayal of the Gibeonites. To understand better, we need to go back a bit in history. During the conquest of Canaan, in the time of Joshua, Israel made a covenant to protect the Gibeonites. However, later Saul broke this covenant and attacked the Gibeonites, killing many of them. The Gibeonites were not part of the people of Israel, but descendants of the Amorites, whom Israel had promised to spare. David then called the Gibeonites and asked what could be done to correct the wrong done to them. They replied that they did not want silver or gold from Israel, nor did they wish to kill any Israelite, but they wanted Saul's descendants to pay for the crime. Thus, the Gibeonites asked David to hand over 7 of Saul's descendants to be hanged, and David agreed, promising to deliver 7 men from Saul's family. Amidst this conflict, tragedy struck Rizpah's life. Among the men David handed over to the Gibeonites were her 2 sons, Armoni and Mephibosheth, along with the 5 sons of Merab, Saul's daughter. David, because of his promise to protect the descendants of his friend Jonathan, spared the Mephibosheth, who was Jonathan's son and Saul's grandson. However, he delivered Rizpah's 2 sons, who was Saul's concubine, to be killed along with Saul's grandsons, the sons of Merab. The Bible records that the Gibeonites hanged these men on the mountain before the Lord at the beginning of the barley harvest, which would be around the month of April. In the midst of this tragedy, the Bible tells that after the execution of her sons, Rizpah took a simple cloth and made a shelter on a rock near where the bodies were exposed. She kept vigil beside them, protecting them so that the birds during the day and the animals at night would not devour the bodies of her sons. At that time, it was profoundly humiliating and dishonorable to allow the bodies of the dead to be exposed to the point of being devoured by birds of prey or wild animals. This practice was not just a matter of negligence, but a symbol of extreme dishonor and curse. For ancient cultures, including Israel, burial was an act of respect and dignity that allowed the deceased to rest in peace. Denying this honor was seen as a terrible condemnation, a way of saying that the person, even after death, was being punished for their sins or decisions made in life. The Bible reinforces this idea in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 26, where it says that, as part of the curses for those who disobeyed God's law, the bodies of their dead would be left for the birds of the sky and the animals of the earth, without anyone driving them away. This image of abandonment and disgrace was one of the most severe punishments a person or a people could suffer, symbolizing the final contempt that not even death could erase. Burial was a sacred act, ensuring that the body could return to dust in an honorable way. Leaving a body unburied was also a way of dehumanizing the person. It was as if, even in death, that individual continued to carry a stain, a shame that followed them beyond life. For a mother like Rizpah, who saw her sons killed and left at the mercy of the forces of nature, this dishonor was unbearable. The idea that her sons would not receive the dignity of a burial was an even deeper wound than the loss itself. This cultural context helps explain why Rizpah stayed by the bodies for months, driving away animals and birds, refusing to allow her sons to suffer this final humiliation. In the view of the time, ensuring that a body was properly buried meant honoring both the memory of the deceased and the continuity of life and dignity for the family. For Rizpah, protecting the bodies of her sons was not just an act of maternal love, but a struggle to preserve the honor of her family and ensure that even in death, her sons were treated with the respect they deserved. Rizpah cared for the bodies of her sons day and night until they could be buried. This process took a long time. She stayed by their side without resting, from the beginning of the harvest until the start of the autumn rains in the northern hemisphere, which lasted almost 6 months. It is possible that David allowed the bodies to remain exposed throughout this period because he was waiting for some sign that the injustice committed against the Gibeonites had been corrected and that God's blessing would return to the land of Israel. He may have believed that over time, the death of Saul's descendants would bring redemption and relief to the people. The drought, which had lasted 3 years, was a constant reminder of divine wrath. And David, as a leader, was desperately seeking a solution to restore peace and prosperity to the kingdom. However, while the king waited for an answer, Rizpah, in her tireless vigil, became a symbol of resistance and maternal love. Her dedication did not go unnoticed. For months, she protected the bodies of her sons, facing the heat of the day and the cold of the night, driving away birds and animals, showing a level of devotion that moved those who heard her story. When the news of Rizpah's persistence reached David, he was deeply moved. At this point, the Bible suggests that the king, inspired by the courage and love of that mother, took action. David ordered that the remains of the hanged men be collected and buried with dignity. This decision was not just a gesture of respect, but also a recognition of the sacrifice Rizpah had made. By ensuring that the bodies were finally buried, David sought to close that cycle of tragedy and seek the restoration of divine blessing over Israel. Just as the bones of Saul and Jonathan, which had been recovered by the inhabitants of Gibeonite after their deaths at the hands of the Philistines, were treated with great respect, so too were the remains of the 7 hanged men, including Rizpah's sons, given a more dignified end. After months exposed to the sun and rain, their bodies were finally collected for a proper burial. The story of Saul and Jonathan was marked by great respect because the men of Gibeonite risked their lives to retrieve the bodies of the fallen heroes who had been profaned by the Philistines and exposed in public. Similarly, David's decision to bury the bones of Saul's descendants in the family tomb was not just an act of compassion, but also of justice. The burial in Saul's ancestral land symbolized the restoration of honor to those who, even after death, bore the weight of the guilt and decisions of their ancestors. Saul's family tomb became the resting place for these men, uniting the fate of the kings and their descendants. It was a solemn burial, laden with symbolism that brought peace not only to the dead, but also to Rizpah, who could finally see her sons' bodies receive the respect they deserved. Honor was restored, and this burial marked the end of a painful journey for the mother who never gave up. It is intriguing to note that until that moment, the Bible reports that the Lord had not altered his stance toward the land of Israel, which indicated that drought and famine still plagued the people. The nation continued to suffer from scarcity, and there were no signs that God's blessing was about to return. For 3 years, the harvests dwindled, water became scarce, and the people faced increasing difficulties. Everyone knew that the crisis was not just natural, but spiritual, a reflection of God's wrath upon Israel due to Saul's unresolved sin against the Gibeonites. However, something extraordinary happened after the burial of those men's bodies. David's gesture of burying Saul's descendants in a dignified manner marked a turning point. The Bible records that after this act of justice and honor, God once again looked favorably upon the land. The cycle of suffering began to break. The rain, which had not fallen for so long, finally returned, bringing relief to the parched soil and hope to the people. The famine that had ravaged the kingdom slowly began to subside, signaling that the curse had been lifted. This detail highlights how much justice and reconciliation with the past were important for the restoration of divine blessing. David's action not only brought peace to Saul's family, but also to Israel itself, which finally saw God's hand move in its favor again. This moment was not just about the end of the drought, but also about the end of a chapter of dishonor and guilt that had hovered over the land. When the bodies were buried and respect was restored, God was pleased with what had been done, and the crisis came to an end as a clear sign that reconciliation and repentance can pave the way for divine restoration. Now, I want to know, did you already know Rizpah's story in the Bible? Yes or no? Tell me in the comments and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming videos.